This week on Africa Weekly, we visit the former slave island of Kunta Kinte in the Gambia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's under threat from sea erosion and neglect. We go on patrol with the Nigerian Navy, waging war on illegal oil refineries in the Niger Delta. And finally, we travel to Mozambique, where the government is trying to cut down on illegal logging in the country's exotic woods. But first, here's a summary of the stories that made the headlines this week. Zimbabwe's opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai has joined forces with former Deputy President Joyce Mujuru, signing a pact to work together to topple President Robert Mugabe in elections next year. Mugabe, now 93, has been in power since 1980, but his ZANU-PF party has for years been dogged by allegations of vote rigging. This week, the veteran leader celebrated 37 years of independence from British rule.
This is just the beginning of the building blocks towards establishing a broader alliance to confront ZANU-PF between now and the next elections in 2018.
A meningitis outbreak in Nigeria has killed 745 people, an increase of more than 50% in barely a week. Over 8,000 suspected cases of the disease has been reported across the country over the past 5 months. Concentrated in northern Nigeria, the country lies in the so-called meningitis belt of sub-Saharan Africa, stretching from Senegal in the west to Ethiopia in the east, where outbreaks of the disease are a regular occurrence. The Ugandan army said it's neutralised the Lord's Resistance Army as troops began withdrawing from the Central African Republic, where they've been hunting the group's feared leader, Joseph Kony. Uganda said Kony now commands fewer than 100 fighters. A self-styled mystic and prophet, Kony launched a bloody rebellion 3 decades ago, seeking to impose his own version of the Ten Commandments. The UN says the LRA has slaughtered more than 100,000 people and abducted 60,000 children. Lawyers for the Zambian opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema have asked a court to throw out a treason charge against him after he was arrested because he allegedly refused to give way to President Edgar Lungu's convoy. Hichilema has been detained since the police raided his home outside Lusaka on the 11th of April, also accused of breaking the highway code and using insulting language. He's launched several unsuccessful legal bids to challenge Lungu's victory in last August's election and says he doesn't recognise his presidency. Egyptian archaeologists have unearthed several mummies, colourful wooden sarcophagi and more than 1,000 statues in a 3,500-year-old tomb near the southern city of Luxor. The tomb, discovered near the famed Valley of the Kings, belonged to a nobleman who worked as a city judge. Meanwhile, a restored statue of King Ramesses II was also unveiled to the public. The International Organization for Migration organised the voluntary return of 154 Burkinabe migrants from Libya. Many claimed they were being poorly treated and even tortured after being detained. 6 years since a revolution that toppled dictator Muammar Gaddafi, Libya has become a key departure point for illegal migrants wanting to reach Europe via the Mediterranean.
It's one of the Gambia's most important historical sites, the island of Kunta Kinte, named after the rebel slave made famous in the novel and US television series Roots.
I think it's very important because we need to know about our history. That is the only way we can truly understand, fully realize our potential.
Kinte is said to have been taken captive in 1767 and held prisoner in this cell. The island fort housed dozens of West Africans like him who were chained and branded before being shipped to the New World. But the UNESCO World Heritage Site, deep in the mouth of the River Gambia, is being eroded away.
Before, the island was very big, 6 times bigger than this. Today, 6 times smaller, but because of the erosion.
Historians say the island was neglected under former President Yahya Jammeh, who instead pushed tours into visiting his own home village. Jammeh was defeated in December polls, ousted from power after 22 years.
We were under a lot of pressure, to conform, to how he interpreted, how he wanted to interpret, Gambian history. And our resistance to that led, the island to suffer, from lack of attention and from lack of funding, particularly, like for conservation exercise.
There is a small slavery museum across the water near where Kinte is said to have lived, but local historians believe their national hero deserves more, with hopes of a resource centre, shows and educational tours. That would build on Kinte's memory, rather than letting the history get washed away. Patrolling the mangroves, Nigeria's Delta Safe task force is on the hunt for illegal oil refineries. Their mission, in short, search and destroy.
To protect oil and gas infrastructure, deter and prevent militancy, sea robbery, crude oil theft, and any other forms of criminality.
The 7,000-strong force is tracking the criminals who siphon off pipeline oil to distill and resell. It's a lucrative business with devastating consequences, and not just for Nigeria's oil-dependent economy.
It has destroyed the whole environment. Commercial life in the creek might not be possible. Aquatic life is destroyed.
Militant attacks 6 months ago caused oil production to plummet, triggering the country's first recession in years. The attacks have halted following government talks, but troops on the ground say the battle against the illegal refineries continues. The task force wants to stamp them out for good.
Over time, we've been dismantling these refineries manually, and the criminals come back to resuscitate these refineries within 3 days, 1 week. So Swan Boogie crushes the materials, and it's very, very cost effective for them to reactivate these refineries.
Oil theft in Nigeria is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's not physical theft but endemic corruption that's at the root of the problem. The military too has been accused of dipping its hand into the pot of black gold.
These Mozambican forest rangers made their first arrest just minutes after arriving at a checkpoint near the northern city of Pemba. The driver had come to buy several tons of bamboo and was en route to resell it. Authorities banned the cutting and transportation of wood between January and June this year to tackle the logging crisis. But rangers have a problem. Truck drivers don't always stop.
This work is complicated because we don't have sufficient means. We don't have enough personnel. All the inspectors are concentrated in the cities or the towns. We can't send people to the cutting zones where the law isn't respected. It's as if we're powerless.
The illegal wood trade costs Mozambique an estimated $500 million in lost taxes every year. In March, authorities launched a major sting operation, seizing 150,000 cubic meters of wood. 3/4 of businesses inspected were fined, bringing in over $2 million in fines.
One of the challenges that we're fighting against organized crime sometimes, and we're learning that illegal logging also involves illegal other things. So their capacity to corrupt our systems is very high.
This Chinese timber merchant claims to be on the right side of the law as inspectors check piles of timber destined for the export market. But often much of the wood that arrives in China has never officially left Mozambique, which is why tree trunks must now be processed locally, creating more work for local sawmills.
I think this is a positive measure as the processing of wood locally will create more jobs here. But obviously not everyone has the capacity to invest in wood processing. This is a big difficulty.
But while the measures are benefiting the economy, some of the trees here might never recover, with species like Paul Ferreau almost extinct.
The 32nd edition of the Marathon des Sables, or Sand Marathon, one of the toughest races on Earth, drew to a close in southern Morocco after hundreds of participants took on the 250-kilometre course across the Saharan dunes. Meanwhile, more than 8,000 people took part in the first edition of the Marathon de Dakar, with winner Kenyan Abere Kassa crossing the finishing line in 2 hours and 18 minutes. Next week on Africa Weekly, we meet the South African taking care of abandoned pigs. Owners duped into buying the so-called miniature teacup breed have been surprised when their cute piglets have grown into full-size hogs. That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.